Hey, my name's James Mulvaney and welcome to Working Lunch, the show where I speak to a different expert every week to discuss 3 actionable strategies to grow your audience, grow your business, or grow your team. Now, today's session is about to begin, so stay right there and we'll be kicking off today's session very shortly. All right, guys, welcome to Working Lunch. Today, my guest is Harry Morton, founder of Lower Street Media, and we're here to talk about how to make your podcast stand out from the crowd. And it's International Podcast Day. So, Harry, welcome along. How's it going?
Very good. I'm all the happier for knowing that it's International Podcast Day.
I was just saying,
what a time for us all to rejoice. You know?
Yeah. Well, it feels fitting that we talk about podcasts. I mean, probably like every 3 working lunches we do, we talk about podcasting. But International Podcast Day, how to grow your podcast, how to make your podcast stand out from the crowd, sounds great. So just start off then by introducing yourself. Tell us about what you do at Lower Street Media and how you got involved in podcasting in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So Lower Street Media is a branded podcast agency. We're working with companies and organizations to develop their content in this medium. And my background, I studied audio music technology at university and went to ended up working in post-production in London in the sort of agency world. Really sort of that was, so I started kind of working in, I guess, 2010 and basically it's been a long sort of journey through audio since then that's led me to podcasts.
What was it about audio in the first place that kind of reeled you in, I suppose?
Well, I've always been into music. My mother's a musician. I grew up around music. So audio sound, I suppose, was always like a big part of life. And then as I sort of continued to study music, the sort of techie side of it really appealed to me. I'm a nerdy techie guy. That's how I roll. So it soon became like, I developed all my skills in kind of using digital audio workstations and like producing music, but then also going to university, it was I was kind of got into producing not just talk radio and audio, but also sound for TV and stuff like that. And so that's kind of what led me down that path, I suppose.
Cool. And just before we kick off, then one last question. So, what do you think has caused this resurgence in podcasting over like the last 4 or 5 years?
Over 4 or 5 years, I mean, I think it's really sort of a mixture of things. Partly this kind of move to on demand are kind of the times and spaces and the roles that audio is playing in our life is changing all the time, and radio is maybe is an amazing tool, and I love radio. Live radio is just a hugely amazing medium. But when you've got 20 minutes on your commute and you want to use that time wisely, and you don't necessarily want to just listen to the latest and great, the greatest hits from the 70s, 80s, and more, but you would like to spend 30 minutes listening to something really valuable for your business or whatever, and I think it's that on-demand trend that's kind of really, really led it, and obviously the technology's followed.
And what do you think? Radio is going to be here to stay?
Yeah, radio's not going anywhere anytime soon, I don't think. And long may it continue. I don't think there's ever going to be a world in which radio is not important. I'm a huge fan. To be honest, most of my live radio experience is around sport these days. I listen to cricket and tennis and things like that on the radio, and I can't imagine ever experiencing sport any other way. So I love radio, but I think podcasting always has a place.
Just got sort of disconnected there briefly.
I did wonder. I just thought I'd keep going and hope that you.
No, it's fine. It's all good. Right. So let's dive into today's session.
Sure.
Firstly, podcasting obviously has become more and more popular. We seem to go from like having 500,000 podcasts to 1 million podcasts in the Apple podcast store within the space of like a few months this year.
Yeah.
So it's kind of growing at a really rapid rate, which begs the question, as podcasters, how can we make our podcast stand out? And what do we need to do from the get-go to make sure that we're sort of doing all the right things and to give us the most, ability to maximize our reach, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's scary, the number of podcasts that have been released just in the last couple of months. I saw a stat yesterday, which I've now forgotten, but it's exponential at the moment, the growth, it seems like. And I think really the answer is certainly the things that I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about at the moment comes back to what you were saying, actually, is that kind of, why has podcasting become more popular in the last 4 years? It's all about behavior. It's the role that audio is playing in people's lives. And I think at the moment that role is changing, right? Like we're not on our commutes right now. Hopefully we'll be returning to our commutes at some point in the future, but we're no longer kind of spending an hour in the gym and commuting 15 minutes each way. And we're probably not, our habits are changing. And so the time in which we're listening to audio is changing. And so I think really the opportunity we have as podcasters to stand out and to grow an audience is to understand those changing behaviors and those changing needs of the audience we're trying to serve, and create the kind of content that fits for that. And so, maybe what the world needs right now is not another Joe Rogan 2-hour marathon, right? But maybe what it needs is something else. And that could mean all manner of things. It could mean a really short form podcast, which is something I'm really excited about at the moment. It could mean, there's lots of different ways to kind of take it. But I think that's the thing that I'm spending my most time at the moment thinking about is what are the needs of our listeners? What are their lives like now? What are they doing with their time, and what kind of media are they consuming? And how can we kind of take advantage of that, really, I suppose, and try and serve them better?
What's the best way of finding out that information if you're new to podcasting? I think the thing that people do is they sort of don't really think about who's on the other end. So what's the best way of actually sort of starting to get to know your audience and find out who is actually listening?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point though, James, because like whenever we start a new podcast with a client, the conversation always starts with, okay, who is the target listener? Let's not try and come up with, I've got this great idea for a show. I'm going to interview X group of people about X topic and it's going to be fantastic. And then they start that show and then they're like, cool, now we've got to find listeners. Like, how are we going to do that? And actually it's much, much better to start from who's the audience we're seeking to serve. What do they need right now? Like, what are the things that would be of value to them? And how can we provide that? And I think that just is immediately going to have a much greater impact. In terms of how you find that out, I mean, I think that's definitely a tricky thing. But the short answer is just speak to them. If you can ascertain who your target audience is, and I don't know if we've lost James again. If you can ascertain who your audience is, and where they hang out, and sort of have a way to identify these people, then just reach out to them. And at the beginning, if you're really just starting out, if this is your first kind of podcast, or you don't have a brand, you don't have like an email list, you don't have a list of people, then literally just one by one reaching out to people, connecting on LinkedIn, setting up phone calls, and trying to say, look, I'm trying to serve people like you. What is it that you're looking for, and what do you need? The other thing, if we're looking for sort of hacks and kind of tips on that front, I can really recommend a tool called SparkToro, which is a new kind of product from the founder of Moz, Rand Fishkin, right, who's something they've heard of. SparkToro is a really great tool for kind of audience insights. So if you can kind of define your target audience in a really kind of clear demographic, you can plug that into SparkToro, and it can give you a list of all of the shows and social media accounts and YouTube channels that group of people follow, which is a really powerful tool that we use a lot when we're kind of developing new shows with clients, because it gives you a sense of, okay, what are people, again, the people we're trying to serve, what are they already consuming? And then how is our show going to, differentiate, what areas of the things they're already listening to can we kind of, copy, steal from, borrow from, and what are the other things that, where can we differentiate and stand out? So it's a couple of things we think about.
SparkToro looks very interesting, actually. I must admit I've not come across this before. So this is from the guy who founded Moz. Yeah,
he's obviously super smart dude, and the product's really interesting. I was lucky enough to, I don't know how I heard about it. It must have been through Twitter, and got in through the beta. So we've been using it for sort of 6 months or so now. But it's open to all at this point, and really powerful tool. And not one of those ones we have to worry about being sort of Cambridge Analytica on everybody. It's not kind of diving into people's really personal information. It's kind of aggregated through all these kind of clever systems they use.
Yeah, so just having a look at this. So basically you just type in effectively like some keywords, which might be like a topic of interest for your listeners, or it might be a word that to describe that audience. And it just comes back with a bunch of different social accounts, websites, podcasts, YouTube accounts that they might follow. So it kind of it like builds a sort of profile, a persona for that type of person, I guess.
Exactly, and it tells you what hashtags they're using on social, what phrases are common that they use. So it's a really powerful way of just sort of getting a quick understanding. Obviously, you're never going to learn as much as I still maintain, like, speak to your target audience. Like, that's the only way you can really understand what they want. But this is a great way to start and just kind of say, cool, this is some of the stuff that they're about.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I recommend that.
Cool. If anyone's got any questions, by the way, for Harry or myself, we're going to be doing a bit of a Q&A at the end. I can see a couple have come in already, but please feel free to put your questions in the comments. It doesn't matter which platform you're on, and they're going to be fed back to me, and we'll be taking a bit of a Q&A at the end. And the website for SparkToro is SparkToro.com, SparkToro.com.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where the name comes from. Slightly odd name, but anyway.
Yeah, it's quite hard to read out that one. And just Google it if you can't find it, and it will come up. That's what I just did.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of summarize, make your podcast stand out. You just need to really have a firm understanding of what your audience is and make sure you're delivering exactly what they want. Think about things like the content you're creating, and also think about things like the length of the show. You know, you don't want to necessarily be boring people for 2 hours if they've only got 10 or 15 minutes to listen to it. Next up, let's talk about platforms, how they're emerging, and sort of the different emerging markets that there are in the podcasting world. Obviously, recently the big news has been, Joe Rogan's moved over to Spotify now. That's just sort of recently gone through, hasn't it? I think the deal was struck about 4 months ago. But, there's obviously a huge amount of investment, and there's obviously a lot of opportunity in the space. What's your take on that, and how can we kind of ride that wave?
Yeah, it's super exciting. I mean, just this week we've heard news that Wondery, the big content company, is also up for sale.
Yeah.
Estimated 200 million plus, or even double that has been, which is just balmy to me. Gimlet Media sold for 200 million, Joe Rogan sold for 100 and something million, and then Wondery for 200 million. It's mind blowing.
And Wondery, are they not? It said that they've got revenues of 50 million, which I'm surprised about, actually, because I swear I read an article a few months ago which said they were really struggling, like not. Or was it Luminary? Am I getting confused?
Luminary were really struggling, yeah.
Yeah.
But still, no, I don't think Wondery is struggling. But I'm still surprised that they're as big as they report to be. They did a raise. They did a raise, or were announced a raise. I don't know if they actually closed it in June of last year. I was just reading today, and at that point, their valuation was half of what they're now predicting the minimum sale value is of 200 million, which is just like mind blowing, and says so much about the industry, right? It just says so much about how bullish people are on this, on this platform. And I think it says a lot about the way that podcasting as an industry, not necessarily relevant to you and I making business podcasts, but so content creators broadly, making really amazing shows and then optioning those and having them produced by Netflix or whoever. I think this is why more and more people are getting really, really interested in this space, is that, the money is not just flowing from the advertising and the audiences within podcasting, but it's like, it goes beyond podcasting into other mediums.
And I think it's like some of the bigger media companies are making acquisitions as well, because they want to, own that real estate effectively. Exactly.
So it's just going to be a super interesting story to follow and see who ends up buying it. It'll be, as has been said, it'll be a really kind of telling move who ends up going for it. I mean, be really interesting to see what Amazon do here, what Netflix do here, what other companies that maybe don't have podcasting. I mean, Amazon have just launched their podcasting kind of segment, so it seems like that might be an interesting take, but who knows?
It's interesting. So you mentioned Amazon, and it'd be interesting to talk about that as an emerging platform. They're kind of late to the game, really. They've obviously had Audible for many years, which kind of encompasses a couple of podcasts and it's audio content. So, but obviously they're now starting to produce. I've seen, for example, Alan Partridge being advertised all over the place at the moment. Yeah, obviously spending a lot of money promoting that, which is exclusive to Audible. Yeah. What's the difference between Audible and Amazon podcasts? Just for someone like watching who's not sure, because I don't even know if I'm sure, to be honest.
No, I'm not 100%. So Audible, I always associated with it's kind of crossing platform. Audible to me was all about audiobooks. It's just about listening to your books, which obviously made complete sense for them to be bought by Amazon. But they seem to be sort of straddling podcasting and audiobooks now. So to be honest, I don't really know what their identity is. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're having an identity crisis. Who knows?
I think as well, but Amazon obviously has a huge user base. They have a complete set of, if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you have like video, you have access to music, half of which I don't really use.
No,
I still have a Netflix subscription, I still have Spotify subscription, etc. So I think it's quite interesting that they kind of, they offer all of this to consumers. It'd be interesting to see like how the usage compares. Like I imagine most people just subscribe to Prime for that, just to get deliveries next day.
That's right. That's right. But I think they're probably increasingly keen to get more share of our time. And I think that everyone got really excited about Alexa and smart speakers generally, and the kind of adoption from a podcasting perspective has been really low. So it'd be interesting to see if Amazon start developing some capabilities there, and can they make that? Because I mean, their devices are in the places that we're all listening right now. We're not, like I said before, we're not commuting anymore. We're in our kitchens, we're in our offices, where our smart devices are. So it seems like there's a big opportunity for them to sort of make that become the trend we were expecting maybe 12 months ago.
Do you think that's what they're trying to do here? Because there's been loads of podcasts have discussed there's discoverability issues in this industry still, and it's quite hard to discover a podcast on a smart speaker unless you know exactly what you want to listen to. So, obviously there needs to be improvements in terms of how you interface with it. And also then just trying to educate people on how to exactly do that. I think that's going to be the tricky part there. But I think you're right. The fact that they sort of launched their own podcast directory will open up opportunities here. They have got a huge amount of these devices all over the world, in people's kitchens, beside people's beds, etc. So like, why wouldn't you want to listen to podcasts on these? At the moment, most of the time when I'm in my kitchen, I have a Google Home actually, but I just use it to play radio. Or just ask it to set timers and stuff. But, it's quite difficult to think, right, okay, play a podcast. And I still think there's like this kind of like learning curve that almost needs to happen.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it just needs to get a lot smarter with it. That's
right. And I'm sure it will. And I'm sure they're working on it, because it makes complete sense, right? If Amazon can keep us in their world, then we're one step away from making a purchase. We have to remember that everything basically feeds back to buying stuff. Well, I mean, not, they make their money on AWS and everything else, but the more they can get us making purchases through Amazon, the better. And if we think about, how podcasts are monetized right now, a lot of it's through direct to consumer brand advertising, right? And so, if Amazon can come up with, I don't doubt that in the foreseeable future, they're thinking about ways that they can make that integration tighter, so that you could be listening to a podcast and say, okay, cool, I'd like to buy that product, please, Alexa.
Yeah. That would be good, wouldn't it? And also it'd be a good way of podcasts are generating additional streams of revenue, in terms of if you're talking about specific products. I think, but again, it'd be hard it's making sure that they get that attribution there as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. And so just to kind of wrap up today's conversation, let's talk about what podcast means for brands post-COVID, and also what they mean for brands at the moment. I know, certainly, obviously, we both do bits of production work for different companies. It's slowed down a lot. There's been a lot less interest in businesses starting podcasts, I think, over the last sort of 6 months. There are still some doing it. We've had some clients who have completely just stopped altogether. We've had other clients who have kind of gone remote, and we've got some clients who are just kind of carrying on, regardless. So, how have you found it over at Lower Street?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a real roller coaster, to be honest. So I'd say March and April we saw a big kind of exodus of people going like, we don't know what to expect. What's this going to do to the economy? We're just going to cancel all expenditure that we can't directly attribute to money coming in effectively. And so marketing is always one of those things to go, and podcasting was among them. But interestingly, we've actually seen a huge uptick since then of people really looking for ways to communicate, ways to put their brand out there, ways to market themselves that are remote. We're not going to conferences anymore. Like so many of the brands we're working with are going, well, we've got all this sponsorship budget that we planned for the next 2 quarters. What are we going to do with this? We need to get our brand out there, and we need to, build an audience. And so a lot of them are turning to podcasting. And I think, in answer to the question, what does podcasting look like for brands post-COVID or during COVID? I think that this asynchronous touch point, because I love live streaming like this is fantastic. Video content is fantastic, but podcasting lends itself so well to being consumed whenever, wherever you want, while your hands are busy doing other things. And I think that for brands, that's a real opportunity to get a hold of time in people's days that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And now that you can't be at a conference shaking hands with your customers and your prospects, I think that's what we're seeing. So yeah, it's been a real mix. We had some people going, oh, we want to tighten the purse strings, and then other people going, cool, we need a way to kind of communicate.
Overall, would you recommend that most brands should be thinking about getting into podcasting now? Do you think it's essential for every sort of brand to have a podcast as a way of communicating with their audience, or using it for internal communications? What do you think?
Well, I'll surprise you by saying yes. Like, being in the business, I might be a touch biased.
Yeah.
But no, I do think so. I think that we're now at the point where we've got over 1 million podcasts in the world. There is no shortage of content, but that pales in comparison when we think about the number of YouTube channels or blogs that exist in the world. Yeah. I still think it's a massively underserved market, and there is, particularly for businesses. So if we're talking about B2B businesses in particular, there's just so many niche subjects there. You can serve an audience. Some of our clients are wildly successful with their podcast, but they have a couple of hundred listeners per episode. This is not a groundbreaking piece of media, but the 200 people that listen to that are the ideal buyers in their really specific market, and that's a hugely powerful tool. And the ability to spend 30 minutes communicating with them on a weekly basis is just hugely valuable. And you also mentioned internal podcasting. I think that's just becoming, again, when we talk about COVID and the impact of remote work, just increasingly kind of important way to stay in touch with your team in a way that gets consumed. You can send an email blast out, but we all know what it's like to get an email from the CEO. We don't necessarily read it with the greatest level of excitement, but we do see a really high level of engagement with podcasting because it's just a more engaging medium.
Yeah, it's interesting. I gave a talk back in March, I think. It was just after we'd gone into lockdown. So it was to the NHS PR and sort of communications department. I was talking about how they could potentially use podcasting as an internal comms tool. And I think one of the benefits is, like you say, you get the email from the CEO, he's written that. Whereas podcasting, you can get a lot more people involved. It's Absolutely. A really good way of shining light on work that's been done within an organization, or, rewarding staff who have excelled or whatever it might be. And it just creates much more of an engaging form of content, and kind of, I think, can be really conducive to sort of getting a very large organization that's distributed all over a country or even all over the world, getting them all on the same page.
Yeah, remote culture is just such a challenge. How do you maintain culture? How do you create culture when you're not in a physical space together? And you can't communicate. Everything is culture, right? But you can't communicate culture in an email very well, whereas the voices of all the different people that are working from all the different locations that they're in is much more, there's much more connection there. And you can sort of create that kind of closeness without having to be physically together. So I think it's a really powerful tool.
Cool. Okay. Should we do some questions, or is there anything else you want to add?
Sure. I'm happy to go with whatever you have in mind.
Great. Yeah, we've got a few questions in already. So I'll just sort of start reeling some of these off. Some interesting stuff here. This is from Daryl. It says, I fear that independent podcasters are losing out to the celebrity-based shows that are now being pushed and promoted more substantially than smaller startups. Because obviously there's like this built-in audience and ease of monetization. Obviously, the celebrities already have this exposure, I guess. Are there any indie podcast networks that can help undiscovered podcasts earn revenue without handing over their IP?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Podcasting was built on independence, right? That's the bedrock of this whole industry, and it's a really important thing that should be continue to be fostered and grown. I'm not an independent podcaster, so I might not be the best place to answer, but I do think that the point that Daryl's mentioned in the question is that networks is a really important thing. So the unfair advantage that a celebrity has is their enormous network, is their huge existing audience. Yeah. And I think as podcasters, independent podcasters, what we need to do is leverage the audience of other people in our world, and that means other independent podcasters. And so I think, whether that means joining an established network of podcasts or creating your own by kind of reaching out to other people in your space, I think that's a really important thing to do. I think the other The other thing that's just the recent development in the industry that I think is worth paying some attention to is the launch of the Podcast Academy, I believe it's called. I can't remember the address, but it's a new sort of association basically they're building for podcasters, and really their focus is a lot around education and kind of promotion of independent podcasters. So I think that's something that's really worthwhile, whether you're a business in the space like me or an independent creator. I think that's a really worthwhile kind of organization to get involved in.
Yeah, I think also my take on that is, there's still opportunity. You've got to just have a good strategy to back up the podcast. I think, if you just record stuff, upload it and hope for the best, well, that's not a strategy and it's going to win. So you need to think about, doing some additional marketing and really have a sort of solid content strategy to sort of support your podcast. You don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on it, but certainly it's going to take a bit of time and a bit of legwork to sort of start getting the momentum. And just things like, making sure that, if you're a business, you have a podcast, whenever you release a new episode, you email your customers to say it's there. Little things like that make all the difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just going to come back to the point we made at the beginning around understanding your audience. And again, like you said, content strategy, and that's exactly it. I think it's less about putting content out for content's sake. It's about really kind of having a purpose, having a reason to do it, and a strategy behind it. Trying to amplify just some content is much harder than trying to amplify a really specifically created piece of content.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Sal. Downloads for audio only media are way down from COVID. Do you think this is permanent, or are we going to all have to do video?
Yeah, so we definitely have seen, or we did see a kind of decline in listenership. And James, I'd love to see what you saw, but we've definitely seen that come back since then. So I feel confident that things are on the rise, and certainly when we're all commuting again, we're going to go back to wanting podcasts to listen to.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned before, I think some of these other platforms that are coming up, the use cases for podcasting right now, when people are listening to podcasting is changing. So it might mean that your podcast in its existing kind of guise is not as relevant as it was pre-COVID, and maybe it needs to kind of adapt slightly to the times and kind of meet the needs of your audience as they exist right now.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good advice there. Okay. Some more questions. What social media platforms work best for podcasters?
I don't think there's one answer to that. It comes back down to your audience, I think. It comes back to that point I mentioned before about understanding your audience. I think knowing where they hang out, it might be that you have a really strong network on Reddit. It might be that everyone, it's a very business focused podcast, and so LinkedIn is the right channel for you. Coming back to Sal's question about video as well, because we can consider YouTube as a social channel. I think while we shouldn't necessarily all be doing video, I think there are opportunities for all of us to be kind of repurposing our podcast content for use on YouTube. And I think that would certainly help a lot of us kind of reach more people and stay relevant, during COVID, as Sal kind of mentioned. So yeah, the social media question, I guess it's about understanding your audience. Yeah.
Okay. And this kind of links into the next question from Catherine King. Top tips for pushing podcasts.
Top tips for pushing podcasts. I would say that the biggest kind of misconception or not necessarily, basically the biggest place people waste money on promoting podcasts, in my view or in my experience, is through paid social media campaigns. It's very, very hard to get someone that's in social media mode when they're looking for snackable short form content to get them to commit to a 30-minute podcast. So you can get your clicks, you can get brand awareness of your show. But actually driving subscriptions and listens is very hard. So the short answer is people find out about other podcasts when they're listening to the podcast that they already enjoy. So it's thinking about ways that you can get exposure for your show on other shows. So does that mean you go and be a guest on other shows? Does that mean paying for sponsorship? Or to Daryl's question at the beginning around partnerships and networks, what other shows can you partner with to do cross promotions and things like that, to leverage one another's audiences? Because it's not a zero sum game. If you're promoting another podcast on your show, that doesn't mean you lose listeners. Because the average podcast listener listens to 7 episodes a week. So by sharing other shows, you're not doing yourself any disservice. And so kind of more of those partnerships, I think, is a great way to go. And it doesn't cost you anything.
That's an interesting point actually about cross promotion. I think that's something that a lot of people overlook. You know, and networking. You know, just speaking to other podcasters. Just because you created a podcast about, you know, X doesn't mean you shouldn't be talking to other people who've done the same.
Exactly.
You know, so get to know your neighbours, I guess, is the sort of way to summarize that, isn't it?
100%.
Andrea Fox made an interesting. She was on on this a few weeks ago. Basically, is an announcer for ITV, and she says ITV CEO does a regular vlog on the intranet because it's more engaging than just writing an email. You know, so
awesome.
You know, again, podcast is a great way to do that, sort of for internal comms.
Totally.
Okay, so let's just have a look at a couple of other questions. So this is from E.R. Hoffer. What formats are working to attract a consumer audience today? What format innovations are you excited about tomorrow?
Yeah, great question. It's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. For me, the way to stand out, we've talked about the challenges of standing out among millions of podcasts. For me, the way to stand out, one of the ways to stand out is to elevate the production value. So I think one of the things that we're focused on a lot is creating narrative style shows. So taking it beyond just a two-way conversation and into more of a narrative-led story format podcast, which does take more work. There's no question. But the end product is always better and gives yourself a much bigger chance of success. The other format that I think is really interesting and should be explored, we've touched on it in this conversation, is short form content. I think that kind of anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes long episodes, I think really serve a purpose that people are looking for at the moment. They don't have that commute, but they have kind of 15 minutes while they're doing the dishes or cooking or whatever. And I think that there's opportunity there to provide something of value in a short space of time and kind of grow an audience around that. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about at the moment.
Okay, yeah, short form content. And again, repurposing. I think a lot of people think, well, okay, I record my podcast as an audio file, upload it, that's it. You know, you've got to make sure that you're chunking out, you're taking out the best bits, you're trying to, you know, push it as much as you can on different platforms and in different forms. It doesn't have to just be like that one linear piece of content.
Absolutely.
You know, again, it doesn't necessarily cost a lot to do that, but it does take a lot of work, especially if you're doing it yourself. So, that's
right. It's time consuming, but worthwhile. We're doing it right now. We have a daily podcast. We've been experimenting with this short form stuff. And we've got a daily show called WFH, all about remote work. And we've done exactly that. We've been taking every single episode and turning it into a YouTube video with full transcriptions. It's taken Kyle on our team weeks and weeks and weeks to get through all 100 and something episodes of it. But but you know, we're going to start releasing those soon, and I think that'll be really valuable. So
cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but worthwhile.
All right. I think that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much, Harry. It's been great to speak to you. Just if anyone wants to get in touch or find out more about what you do, how can they do that?
I hang out mostly on Twitter. So I'm at Podcast Harry on Twitter. And everything we're doing with my company is at lowerstreet.co.
Cool. Thank you very much for your time, Harry.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.